75 years of age. I'm just at the end of my fall season, and there's a lot of history that makes a person who they are. My family came to Alberta before the province of Alberta became a province. It was the Northwest Territories, and if we remember the history of Canada, the Hudson Bay Company and the other trading company that came out of Montreal hired basically 90%, 95% coureur de bois from Montreal and Quebec to trade with the First Nation people in Western Canada. So the population here, the first language and second language was French, Cree, and then English. And if you look at the annals of the Hudson Bay and the Northwest Company, everything is written in French, which a lot of people don't realize is because of the language that was spoken by the people in Western Canada. So when my great-grandfather Louis Chevigny de la Chevretière, who was one of the seigneurs that brought settlers to Quebec, to Canada in the 1600s, he was invited by the bishop in St. Albert to create a town because it was just a mission. And there was a growing population of French-speaking Métis, and they needed a businessman to start developing stores and that kind of thing. So he came here in 1880. And if you go to the Heritage Place in St. Albert, as a great-grandson here, I had that house moved that was built in 1880 in the Heritage Park in St. Albert. And he helped build the bridges, the stores. He brought my grandfather, Alcide Piquette, from Quebec because he was an accountant. And he needed somebody who could manage the books and run things. So my grandfather came just before 1905, 1901, and he became a school trustee, and French was the main language taught in the Alberta school at that time. English was in Fort Edmonton, but all the surrounding area were mainly Francophone speaking, like Morinville, Legal, and Vegreville, and we had Plamont. Plamont was coming in. Lac La Biche Mission had a population of 700-800 people way back in the 1870s. My family is really a founding family of Alberta. We're some of the first white people, like my grandfather was the first white child born in St. Albert. And when my great-grandfather, Joseph Plamont, an American Francophone who had moved from Quebec, he felt that living in the United States, he was losing his French, and the people living there were losing their French. So at that time, what best thing to do than to come to Canada, get free land or a few dollars a quarter section of land, and create your own town so you could maintain your language and your music and your culture. And that's what he did. And that's how Plamondon was created, just like Saint-Paul-des-Métis and Bonnyville and places like that. It was all an attempt by a lot of people, like the Ukrainians who came after, to maintain their language and culture. They formed themselves into communities. And unfortunately, when Canada decided to create the province of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, they did institute the laws to preserve this multicultural, multilingual, but the provinces, mainly run by Anglophones, decided to do away with these laws. And a part of my story was to try to, let's get back to our roots and respect people's language and culture and religion, because we are made up in Canada of many people from many different countries, and we also have to respect the people who were here before us, the First Nation people. Yeah, we're 7 in the family, 5 brothers and, well, I'm the 5th one, and 2 sisters. They were an afterthought. So I'm a sandwich, I'm sandwiched between the 4 brothers and 2 sisters. I had to learn to survive. One thing that happened to me when I was growing up, we grew up on a dairy farm. We supplied the milk for Lac La Biche and Fort McMurray. And Dad decided when he came out of the coal mines in the Coal Valley, where he basically from the age of 18 until he had 4 sons, he decided to move on the family farm in 1943. And I was born in 1946, so I was born on the family farm, and shortly after we started the dairy farm because he had 5 sons to help him out. And he thought there was no milk being delivered to the town folks in Fort McMurray and Clearwater. And so he got together one of his friends in Lac La Biche, and they started the Piquette dairy farm and the Badgery dairy farm. So I grew up working very, very hard. You know, from the time I can remember, get up early in the morning, get up, get the cows and help out the cows. But our family was very educationally minded. All 7 of us ended up with at least 4 years, minimum of 4 years university. Both my mother and father said, your life is not on the farm after you leave here. Our life here, our duty here is to provide you with an upbringing and enough money for you to go to university and get your education. Because at that time, Francophones living in Alberta, very few went to university. And they thought one way of making sure people became respected was through higher education. So all of us left the farm, and I was the last one to leave the farm, and we became teachers or chemical engineers or superintendents or priests, and in business across Canada. So we are a very, very close family. In my retirement, I spent a lot of time with my brothers and sisters, and we're all very interesting people, very intelligent people, and people have had a very adventuresome life. We believe in living the moment to the best we can. I think I was born somewhat of a rebel, somebody thinking outside the box. When I went to school, the whole community spoke French, but we were taught in English. I had very little written French. But I decided in my first year in university to go to Collège Saint-Jean, Campus Saint-Jean, and take 1 year which was taught from the University of Ottawa, which was the old classical course. And that gave me the inspiration and the knowledge that I started to realize, why, if Canada is a bilingual country, why isn't it the 2 official languages as part of the school structure and be professionally taught to the kids? So when I finished University of Alberta with a degree in history and French language, I was hired, of course, to teach French as a second language in Lac La Biche. And they started French education then in grade 7. There was nothing in elementary. And no, you tell me that anyone knowing psychology or human development, you don't start teaching a second language or a first language when they're teenagers. So I quickly rebelled against that system. I became a school principal, and I was a very innovative school principal. I was school principal in the Métis settlement, Caslin, which again, I had to think outside the box, bringing people's culture, food, language into the school. And they actually made a video of the innovative type of education that I was providing to the Métis students, where they were all wanting to come to school as opposed to wanting to run away from school, like not having any strap in the school, and making sure the school was a community center for everybody after school and during school, where the parents became teacher aides. And so I became principal in Vermilion. Then all of a sudden I got a call from the superintendent from Edmonton Public, who wanted to hire me because of my innovative kind of streak. First of all, he hired me as a vice principal, and I then became a school principal. But the amazing thing was, he was an Ukrainian, and he was interested in second language training. And he had this crazy idea that we should start teaching French in the even grade 1 in a different kind of method. So I was tasked to put together a committee of school principals to do a pilot about French immersion. This was way back in 1974, 75. I traveled to Ottawa and got the federal government immersion program that they were using with the civil servants, which was imported from France to teach English how to speak French. So I brought this back to Alberta, and we started out the French immersion in Alberta, and it became a growing phenomenon because so many people working for government wanted their children to learn French properly, being able to speak it as a first, second language. And so that really gave me an impetus at that time that you didn't need to be somebody important to make fundamental changes in terms of how people think. For example, I met people like Gene Swideski, who met me. He was a high school teacher, and he said, well, could that be applied to Ukrainian? And then I got contacted by the Chinese community. And so all during the time in the 1970s, late 70s, we started just not the French programs, the French immersion program, but also the Chinese and Ukrainian and many other languages started getting onto the bandwagon of using French immersion as a way of instruction. And it was highly successful. And if you look in Alberta today, we have the greatest numbers of French immersion students in all of Canada in terms of on a percentage basis. When I also grew into my knowledge of Francophone history, I also realized that why are we not asking the government that French should be taught as a first language to French Canadian, who struggle very often in French immersion schools. So I started pushing the government, and this is where I got into politics. At that time, Grant Notley was the opposition leader. I had met him when I was working with the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce. I had invited him to speak on economic development in front of a very sparse crowd. He was the only member. That was 1981. And so he came to me when he heard I was moved on the farm, and he said, Piquette, so we need people like you to get into politics because you have a business background, education background, and I've been put in charge by Lougheed to create new boundaries for the next election, for the 1983 election. So I said, well, I'm not going to run because I have a young family and I'm farming and teaching and I'm busy with organization. And he said, well, help me create the writing. So I did that, and we created a new writing, and it was just presented to the government in 1985, just before he crashed and was killed. And I was really upset because Grant Notley, in my mind, was to be the next leader of Alberta. I supported Pierre Lougheed, but I thought Grant Notley had innovative ideas about business, about climate change that he was talking about back then, about rural development. He was always stopping at farmers and having a cup of coffee. Like when I started campaigning in 1985, so many people said, you know, Grant Notley stopped here 2 years ago and we had a cup of coffee and he left at 11 o'clock. And I can see why Rachel Notley never saw her father. He was an amazing man. He knew exactly what Albertans thought. And he was not a radical. He was more, to me, a liberal-minded individual as opposed to being, lefties or whatever. So I became quite attracted to him in terms of unique competition in politics. You can't just be a one-party kind of thing. He came to me after and said, Piquette, now we have a new writing that's going to be proposed just before he died. You got to run for it. And I said no to him, and I felt so bad. And when Ray Martin, after he died, came back and said, you remember Grant wants you to run? Run. And that's how I got into politics, Ray Martin coming back. And I told Ray Martin, I said, you're not going to like it, but if I'm elected, I'm going to be pushing the French Section 110, because a lot of Albertans need to be educated. They're not respecting fully the Constitution of Alberta as designed in 1905. I think he didn't think I was going to win. He said, oh, no problem at all. Then Nick Taylor phoned me shortly after. He was the leader for the Liberal Party, and he said, Piquette, why don't you run for me? I mean, you're a businessman. You work for the Chamber of Commerce and the Vancouver Board of Trade. We need people like you. I said, well, I'm sorry, Nick, but you don't have a seat, and Ray Martin has a seat with Jim Gurnett. So I made the choice to run for the NDP. It was a very interesting campaign because Derek Fox and I, became the MLA of Vegreville, we helped design the economic development policies and small business policies and the agricultural policy for the NDP, which was very, very popular. Private telephone line for every farmers. We even talked about fiber optic, bringing that to local school, because I had been exposed in San Francisco to the new technology called fiber optic, the new age where we could be connected, so we put that in our platform, and we also use the Heritage Trust Fund as a means of funding a lot of these things. Rather than having Newfoundland borrow money from us, why don't we lend that to our small business people? Why don't we install with the telephone company, Alberta Telephone, fiber optic private telephone line to farmers? Because at that time, the interest rates were on 15, 25, up to 30% interest rate for householders, for mortgages, for commercial loans. And there was a real depression in Alberta at that time. So my idea was, let's use our own money we saved. We had about $12 billion in the Heritage Trust Fund. Let's use that money to innovate, to change, and to create new economies. And this is also where I started talking about using forestry as a means of creating jobs. We were too stuck on oil and gas, I thought. Our whole economy and budget was almost 100% oil and gas. So I started working with Bud Sparrow, who I had met through the Chamber of Commerce, about developing the resources in the Lac La Biche Forest and the Grand Prairie Forest. And so one of my first speeches I made in the House was to do an FMA, looking at the forestry inventory to see what kind of development we could be having in the forestry industry. So you heard me talking a lot in the House about creating jobs in rural Alberta by developing forestry, sawmills, integrated sawmills, using new environmentally safe types of process. And that's how we got Alpac in Lac La Biche, where we created 3,000 to 4,000 jobs, which saved the local economy, because Lac La Biche, Plamondon would have been ghost town today without Alpac being built there in 1990. A lot of my campaign was to do with farmers having the resources and the capacity to borrow money at 6%. Small business up to $500,000 loans they could use to pay back some of their loans. They were paying 25 or 30%. So I won my riding, much to a lot of people's surprise, because the previous election, the NDP, I believe, got about 6 or 7%. So I jumped to about 42% in the first election. It was such a marvelous evening, because I thought I would win, but I thought the chances to win were probably just dreaming. When I woke up the next morning after a big night of celebration, one of the media guy, I think it was Linda Goyette from the Edmonton Journal, called me up and said, "So what's on your agenda?" And I just said, "Just watch me." So my first speech that I made in June of 1986, I spoke French and English in the Alberta legislature and gave a history lesson about how the West was created, with 2 official languages, respect for multiculturalism, the story of Louis Riel, the story of respecting the laws that the province of Alberta was founded upon, Section 110, which most people had not heard, and which a friend of mine has started a court case in Saskatchewan. I was working with a group of people in Western Canada to make sure that if the court and the Supreme Court indicated that was the law of the land, then we didn't have to make this political fight over it. And so during the spring session of 1986, I thought everything was going well, because even David Carter sent me a beautiful little note saying, "You're going to go far in Alberta politics. You're going to make a mark in Alberta politics." So I thought the goodwill was there. We were looking at reconfederation. Mulroney was calling the Meech Lake Accord to reconcile Quebec with the rest of Canada. April 7th, which you probably want me to talk about, is probably the next chapter in my life. There was an upcoming meeting with Mulroney. I've invited all the premiers across Canada to meet him at Meech Lake. Don Getty decided to kind of be fairly important as a premier, and he called a pre-meeting here in Edmonton. And lo and behold, in a couple of days before the meeting took place with all the premiers, like Robert Bourassa, Davis came here from Ontario, I got a call asking me to be present at that meeting at the Edmonton Inn. So I showed up at the Edmonton Inn. I was chauffeured over there, and I was made to sit by Robert Bourassa because I could speak French. Now, unbeknown to the government, I was scheduled by Ray Martin and Pam Barrett to ask a question to Nancy McBeth, the Minister of Education, about Francophone education. I was lobbying the minister, Nancy McBeth and Don Getty, to change the School Act to allow Francophone education to take place. And I indicated there was a court case emanating, and instead of waiting for the court case, let's change the School Act and respect Section 23. Nancy McBeth spoke French very well. She came out of French immersion, and she agreed to answer in French in the legislature. So I thought everything was well organized. I had met the premier. We were reconciling with the rest of Canada. Alberta was leading, and I was one of the first people to stand up and ask a question after Ray Martin, and I started in French. On est très impatient. On attend depuis longtemps. We have been waiting for a long time. I was going to translate in English, but I started my question in French. Mr. Carter, the president, the Speaker of the House, stood up and said, "En anglais, s'il vous plaît." And they made a play about this here at the... En anglais, s'il vous plaît. I didn't know how to respond to that. I thought he was kind of joking, because here we were with a number of premiers in the gallery, and all the national media had come down to this gathering of premiers across Canada, prepare for a reconciliation with Quebec, with Meech Lake. And so I stood up after I sat down. Of course, the rules of the House, when the Speaker stands up, you sit down. And I kind of, a little bit shocked, I stood up again and I started the question again in French, thinking he was just joking. Well, he wasn't. All of a sudden, I had this angry retort that I had to speak English or to leave the House. When I sat down, I had to decide my political career because I knew if I really forced the issue, French was not very popular in Alberta, and it was not very popular in Western Canada. There was a lot of anti-Quebec hatred back then because of the referendums and so on and so forth. And I knew that if I stood up, I could probably kiss my political career goodbye. But I remember my grandfather telling me when I was young, he said, the only people that makes a difference in life are the rebels, the people who are strong enough to stand up on behalf of other people. And that remark that at maybe 5 or 6 years old came up to my mind. It was like a spiritual awakening. And I stood up and I basically told the Speaker I had the right to speak French in the Alberta legislature, and I was going to contest his ruling, and which meant I was asking for a trial in French. And of course, he agreed, thinking he was going to win. The commotion of this event was just unbelievable because I wasn't prepared that day. I thought, when I came out of the legislature, there must have been 75, all the media across Canada were there, and it just happened. What a great start to reconciliation when you have the Speaker of the House preventing an official language not to be spoken in the House. I live under the lens of cameras for months and months and months. We had the young Francophone people across Alberta organizing in their schools their parents to come to demonstrate in the legislature here. I suffered through a 3-month trial period with constitutional experts. And all the constitutional experts said I was completely right. But the government decided I had to apologize anyway. So December the 1st, a whole big rally came up to the legislature. I think Ken Kowalski, the people were shocked because they couldn't believe 1,000 or more people coming down with buses and placards and Leo Piquette, that hero, and university students. And I awakened the young people. The old people were still scared because we were taught as francophone. I mean, it's okay to speak French in the home, but don't do that publicly because that's English, okay? So many of the older generation were afraid to support me. Even some of the French organization. It was the young people that I awakened their pride. I was young, I was only 39, 40, and they could see that I was a new generation of people. So I thought, where is this going to end up? Because I eventually did not apologize. The government decided to accept my 25% apology as sufficient and left me alone. But in the meantime, the Supreme Court is hearing the Saskatchewan case about a traffic ticket by a priest that had taught me, Father Mercure, who had died of cancer just prior to my election. But I had storied and we had talked together on how to advance the cause. I was going to use the political process, even going to use the court process. It went up to Roger Lepage, a friend of mine who's a lawyer, went up to the Supreme Court on February the 1st or 2nd. All of a sudden the news came out that Section 110 was in fact illegal, and the Alberta and Saskatchewan legislature were bilingual, and so were the courts. I mean, I could not believe how, that day just reverberates in my memory because this was basically for my generation and my grandparents' generation and my great-grandparents' generation. Finally, a Supreme Court that says you do belong in Canada, you're not inferior. Just because you got the conquest of the Plain of Abraham doesn't mean that French is not an official language in Canada. It was from the very beginning because the French and the English did make compromises and did agree when Canada was constituted in 1867, there were two official languages. And even the West was constituted French and English, and then was taken away. So that was, to me, the greatest moment in my life until June, when the law was changed. One of the things when, many years after, when David Carter and we shook hands, I said to him, you probably did the right thing to awaken Canada to reality. Because, there was all this anti-French backlash. Because you have to remember at that time, Preston Manning, because of the Piquette affair, started the Reform Party. And I was on radio talk shows with him a number of times where he said we're going to take Alberta out of Canada because we're not going to allow French to be shoved down their throat. My relationship with Ralph Klein was amazing during that time because with Preston Manning kind of sowing a lot of hate, to me, was hate against the Francophones and Quebec and the reality of Canada. Ralph Klein, who was the mayor of Calgary, right in the middle of the Piquette affair, calls me up and says, Piquette, come down to Calgary. We're going to put up the Franco-Alberta flag here in the city of Calgary to show our support for you. Now, the polls are showing in Calgary like about 75% of people were against the bilingualism. And after we did this, television and everything else, and that's where I saw his power as a leader, the polls taken about a month later showed Calgary about 80% in favor. Teaching and talking about it did make fundamental changes in Alberta. Especially in the cities, where a lot of the young people recognized that learning more than one language is important. French immersion had been started. And there was not the backlash from the young population. It came from people in their 60s and 70s that were used to, if I'm a Ukrainian, why why do you have the right to speak French? I'm told to speak in English. I'm in Ukrainian. I said, well, you don't have to. I said, globalization today demands we have more than one language. It's actually an economic asset to speak more than one language. I started my career by traveling in Europe, where knowing 3-4 different languages was considered to be normal. And here in Canada, we're having a battle about speaking more than one. And if you look today, if you look at the fathers of Confederation, Trudeau was probably my biggest inspiration when I was a young man at university, was to see him fighting for gay rights, which at that time, Edmonton here were still raiding the gay houses here and arresting people. I was going to university when a friend of mine ended up in jail because he was gay. And then the aspect of having 2 official languages and to sell this, because it was a struggle. A lot of the anti-hate kind of Trudeau thing, even existing today, has a lot to do with the fact that the Charter of Rights preserved the 2 official languages, instituted multilingualism, multiculturalism in Alberta. And it was picked up by the Lougheed government, like Horst Schmidt. He helped to start the Alberta Heritage Festival here in Edmonton, the Ukrainian Village. We started to look at respecting our immigrants, our people. I started working with the Black people. And I still am. I'm helping with immigration from Africa in terms of welcoming them into the society, creating the means for them to integrate successfully into our Canadian mosaic. Because one thing that Louis Riel, if you read what he said, he believed in a multicultural, multilingual Western Canada. And that's what we're becoming. You got Louis Riel, who fought for Western Canada to be different, not to be a melting pot like the United States, and we are there now. So when I look back at the struggles I've had with some of the pioneers in Francophone education, multilingualism, a lot of the people, the Ukrainian people, the Arab-speaking people, people of different language, religion that come here, to be respected as normal human beings, to have human dignity, is something which was not talked about 35, 40 years ago. You always had a backlash. You had this idea that everybody had to be in the same melting pot. So one of the things that I think I brought to Alberta politics was to stand up and not to back down in the face of mongers, people who are against change, afraid of change. And, we live, for example, in this pandemic with the same kind of thing. Fear of the unknown. Insecurity is what breeds very often hate between people. But the thing is, it's not good to play up to these fears, because if you play up to these fears, it just simply perpetuates. And you need to speak the truth, and you need to educate. You need to reinforce positive behavior and human dignity. Well, it was very difficult for my kids, very difficult from I got a divorce during my political career, because I became, I spoke across Canada. I was invited to speak across Canada, and even in Louisiana. I helped to revive some of the Acadian culture down in Louisiana. Political life has a life of its own, because you don't control your life. And that's what a lot of people don't realize, that I really respect people that get into public life, because I think all of us want to be elected to serve, to improve things. Maybe some have too many egoistic kind of tendencies, and those are the people you want to avoid, not to elect. But the compassionate leaders that think of the welfare of their citizen, I think that they are, just like our nurses in this pandemic, we should be honoring them on a daily basis, because that's what makes democracy such a beautiful human experience, is the fact that we have compassion within our political system that looks after the welfare of people. And people disagree. A lot of people will say, well, we can take care of our own. The trouble is, today, that may be the case when we're living in caves, etc., but even then, people were social animals. And the larger communities we live in, the more services that human beings need to be able to raise healthy families and to be healthy themselves. The role of government is really to take a look at the vision where we're going as a society and to advocate for changes that very often are opposed by a group of people. But in the long run, you're trying to evolve our human society into a more social society, a society that does not divide themselves from different religions, different languages, that every human being is really a creature of God. I guess I had kind of a different experience as a politician because I was in opposition, and an opposition member usually don't make much impact unless they're a leader. But I was able I always believe that if you work with the people, organizing people from the grassroots, you can do a lot of changes as a leader. You don't need to be an alpha male to do changes. Just like we're finding now that, here in Edmonton, we have 8 out of 10 or 12 councillors that are women. I mean, who would have dreamed that? But really, what it is to give the authority to people that they can speak out. They have something to contribute, and it doesn't take. One time we used to just choose maybe the elite of our society to be running things. Today, the common individual can make an impact. So one of the things that I guess I was most surprised about my life in opposition as an MLA is that if you work successfully with people, organize them, and stand up for a clear vision and choose your battles, you don't need to be in government to make fundamental changes. And so very often people like to run for government because you will become a cabinet minister. But like my son decided to run for the NDP in 2015, he didn't think he would win, but he thought he had ideas that would contribute for the betterment of Alberta. He was fighting for the survival of the Athabasca University, which I helped to bring forth back in 1986. And so I taught my son that he could contribute even in opposition to represent people. And so one of the things that we need to learn as a society is that MLAs or people in politics are just ordinary human beings, but we need to judge the character of the people that we elect. One of the things that I find with some politicians is that it's all about me and not about the people they serve. If I would have looked after my own self-interest, I would have never had the Piquette affair, because I could have probably survived the next election, but it created an opposition against me, even in my own writing, that led me to lose the 1989 election. But I could have been discouraged, but I did not. I created a new business, created a family business, which survives today. I got involved with Francophone education. We won the Supreme Court with Section 23 in 1990. Ralph Klein appointed me as one of the first trustees for the Francophone boards in Alberta. And I worked successfully with the government, with Chamber of Commerce, and even at my old age, starting a new business at the age of 69 to help communities lobby more successfully, how to write application, how to never accept no as a first response. Making a mistake is just a learning curve. If your application is rejected, well, make it better. And focus on winning. The winning is really, the thing I find that I've been very, very lucky in my life that I've had a lot of setbacks. But every setback, to me, has been an adventure. I look at bad times, well, that's a curveball. what can we do about it? What can we learn from it? Let's make it fun. You know? I like to enjoy the space I'm in, and I'm lucky in my old age. I'm a fairly contented individual, proud of the province he grew up in, proud of my family, and proud of our country. I was very fortunate, from being a school principal to being a writer in newspapers, from being a publisher, from being a salesman, to traveling all over the world, to have farmed successfully, and I'm still farming at my age, to run businesses, to be leaders of communities. Almost everything I have done, I have been successful. Family life is probably the most challenging thing you have, but one thing that I have, I created a family business where even my grandkids are working now in the family business. Piquette insurance agencies out of Boyle, Athabasca, and Lac La Biche. And my two daughters bought me out when I retired, and they've hired their kids and my grandkids. And during the pandemic, we did very well. We had the whole family going to university and working at part-time in our family business. Even with divorce, I find that I had that experience in life. I hired my ex as part of my business, and I feel that relationship can fall apart, but we should never turn our back on people that were part of our lives. And the thing that I've learned about divorce is not divorce that is harmful, it's the relationship of the exes. They should learn to get along with each other for the sake of the kids, because the kids came on this earth without their permission. You put them here, you're responsible until you die, and you should show example of how you should reconcile with past mistakes, with issues of relationship, and that relationship issues is not the end of the world, just a stepping stone to make yourself into a better person. And growth takes place all the time. The thing that I find at my age, I'm working with 34, 35, 40-year-old people. They're so talented. I find the young people today, they're 10 years ahead of where I was. They're educated, they know how to, they're creative, they know how to work online, they know how to take these new technologies and make great things. You just take a look at the EV revolution. The technologies are just exploding. It's young people that are using all of this innate intelligence and connectivity to create a new environment for man who has struggled to respect nature that he's been living with and taken advantage of. And now we have to turn the corner and say, man should not destroy. Man should be living with nature, should respect nature. We need to get off oil and gas and move into new energy form. We need to make the change so that we can survive, and for the rest of the world can survive in a respectful way of our luckiness of being created with the intelligence we have. But that intelligence is not intelligence if it means destroying most of the lives or animal life on Earth, and we're doing that very successfully. So we have a lot of challenges, but I think the hands are. There are a new generation, I think, are much ready for change. I just came back from Vancouver, for example, where it was very unusual to find two white couples, two individual. It seemed to be mixed marriages is now becoming very common. So I think young people now are this whole division that we grew up with. You had to marry a French Canadian or a Ukrainian if you're in the Ukrainian community, or a Catholic or a Protestant or a Methodist, is out of the window today for the young people. Today people are looking at the world as one community, and that's where we have to go to. I tried in my life, in the school where I was school principal, in politics, to always challenge people to make changes, to respect our individual human dignity, and to extend that to all the people that surround us. And that's what I call empathy. You have to be a team player, and you can't do anything by yourself. First of all, when you get into politics, make sure you listen, you represent. It could be a need that people are still not particularly aware of. For example, changes in the environment we're living in. For a lot of people, are not paying attention to that in their daily life, but it has to be spoken about. How the leader in the community need to be attuned with the needs, the present need, but also the future needs of his community. What I've tried to inspire to my kids is that never look at just today. You got to be, today needs to be the step to tomorrow, and you need to be prepared, because survival is never guaranteed. But planning, proper development of policies, always thinking outside the box, because I think one of the things we're very so fortunate as people, as human beings, is that if you look at our evolution has quickened with the more knowledge we have. The trouble I think we've lagged behind is the ability to integrate successfully in terms of people. And I think to quit the polarization in politics that we have now. The fight between the right and the left is a human condition, but it should not emanate in terms of destroying our democracy because you want to dominate one over the other. It's like in business, you need competition, but it needs to be fair competition. It needs to be the respect of the democratic process and debate. And when you lose, you lose. When you win, you lose. You win with respect, and you don't downplay the opposition. I think you got to elevate human nature, elevate its need to be loved, to be appreciated. You don't win by putting down. You don't win by marginalizing. I keep my enemies close to my chest. A lot of people ask me, how come I got so many friends with the other parties, even though I've had fundamental differences? And the reason why is because we respect each other's opinion. We respect each other as human beings. For example, Peter Elzinga, and I have so many friends within the Conservative Party, mainly because they learned to respect my character, and I've learned to respect theirs. And as you realize in your political life after you're out of it, that, we were fighting for the same thing. We were looking at the betterment of our community, and I think we did a good job. And if you look at Alberta, I think we have a long ways to go. I'm very proud that I played a little part in terms of communicating to my students, to my political colleagues, the important role we all play in making this society a better place for our grandkids. When you just criticize, you have no alternative. It's simply negative. I mean, negative doesn't help anything unless the negative results in the positive being created. And that's the main thing, which I think when you're getting into politics, don't bring your anger. Some people run for politics because they're angry. Anger has no business in politics. What you need is honest discourse, debate. You can raise your voice, but apologize if you hurt somebody's feelings. I remember when with the Reform Party, for example, all of a sudden I get a call from Preston Manning and Stockwell Dave after they became the official opposition, and they discovered that in Ottawa it was different from Alberta. They asked me to give a history lesson to their party members about the history of francophones in Canada and in Western Canada. I gave them a history lesson. That's what they wanted to have. And surprisingly, out of that meeting that they invited me to attend in Ottawa, they changed a lot of their outlooks about bilingualism, about how Canada was constituted. If you isolate yourself in a little part of Canada, you don't see the whole beauty and strength of the whole country. This criticism of Quebec, when I look back how far Quebec has come in the last 50 years, I mean, I was there in 1967, representing Alberta for Expo 67. I mean, Quebec was still dominated by Anglophones who ran about 90% of all the businesses. And I go there on a frequent basis. I'm going there in about 2 weeks from now. Quebec is now leading Canada in terms of teaching technologies in colleges and universities, and their job market is booming in terms of jobs in high technologies, and so what a change! And they're successfully running their own business, and so when you look at the fact that Quebec, in terms of our constitution, in terms of our history, for too long we tried to keep them down as a people, just like we've done with First Nation and Métis, and they had to rebel and to stand up and to be proud of themselves as a people. And I find the same thing happening among the Métis and the First Nation. Right now we're going through a reconciliation as a nation. It's about time. I mean, I criticize the welfare scoop we were doing in the 1960s and 70s, where we're apprehending young children out of my school because and taking away their family allowance because they were not attending school. But in the schools, we were using the strap. We were discriminating against them. They didn't feel safe in the school that they were attending. We have a lot to reconcile with our First Nation people. Just like in Western Canada, we have to understand that the struggles of people in Quebec or elsewhere in the world, we need to stand with them and not criticize them, because every little rebellion that you see about human nature, wanting to be listened, wanting to be loved and to be respected, how do you solve that? Is by respecting them, is to in fact saying you're right, you do have a place in our society, in our world. And when they are invited into your community, they're the greatest Canadians you can have. For example, I'm working with provincially now across Western Canada with the Franco-African people coming from 27 different countries in Africa, where we created programs where the child is helped in the school, in the home, with one of our advisors, student advisors. They're mentored to be successful. We were awarded a contract with the City of Edmonton to provide food security, language security among many of the immigrants in the pandemic. And those are the kind of projects I'm still working in, but I'm simply an advisor to these communities of how to set up organizations that will serve their people and allow their people to successfully integrate within our society. And it's amazing how these people are doing well. I mean, within 3-4 years, they have good jobs, they're starting businesses. They are not the American black people that were subjugated and mistreated for so long, where you can see the difference completely. The governments of Canada have decided that it is important to make sure you're there at the beginning. When they land here, they will be helped. Like we're doing that now with the Afghanistan. We're saying we'll take 40,000 Afghanistan. Canada has proven to be so successful in bringing people from other countries. And within a few years, look at the Syrian people, 50,000. And their unemployment right now is less than the Canadian average. You know, it's amazing. So you can see when I talk about the need for leadership, for empathy, people that are empathetic spirit, where you feel the pain of people, you feel their needs. You know your needs, you identify what you need, and what your leaders need to have is to have that feeling that the people they serve, they have the same needs as you do, and that you don't segregate, minimize. You are generous, because when you are generous, they will give back 10 times. And we find that with so many of our foreign students. I'm working with new technology companies coming out of Taiwan and other countries. And we work with melding them with university people here. And the NDP were very good at really starting up a lot of the new startup and new technology. It's amazing how quickly these young people create hundreds of jobs. And for example, one company that I work with has created 1,000 jobs in the last 3 years. in Alberta. So I find that when you have a generous spirit of advising, consulting, reaching out, being there like a child growing up in your country, you need to make them walk, you need to let them fall but get up, but be there to support them. They will become the greatest Canadians that you will ever have. And they speak so highly of Canada when they travel around the world. And that's what I'm so proud that in my young mind, I always had this feeling, why do we divide people according to colors or language or whatever? And from the very beginning, when I was 16, 17, and maybe the reason why I didn't say that at the beginning, I lost my hearing when I was 15 years old. I was completely deaf for about 6 years. I had to learn sign language. I had to learn to lip read. And I suffered bullying. I was one of the most popular child in school, and I became the most bullied child until I had this doctor, American doctor, came to Edmonton and had developed an operation to put one of the first implants in the ear to connect the 3 bones that had been eaten away by an ear infection. And I recovered hearing in my left ear. So during that period of time of feeling unwanted and unloved, and when I regained my hearing, I said, I'll dedicate my life to helping people that have no voice, who feel that they have no hope, because I felt that way for so long. But I was given the gift of hearing again, and I can now speak, I can now hear, and it made a big change in my life, simply that experience. For 15 years of my life being normal, 6 years of my life having a handicap, a hearing handicap, and for example, I met Mr. Chrétien at a wedding in the United States, Scottsdale. We worked together in economic development here. Ralph Klein, I worked with Ralph Klein in 2000 to kickstart the oil and gas industries, to get rid of the boiler and machinery tax. I was representing Alberta for Western Diversification, Service Canada. I did that for about 8 years, traveled Canada, but I was asked to work behind the scene to put together agreements between the federal and the provincial government. They wanted to be very quiet because there was always fights between Alberta and Canada, but if I could be used behind the scene to create an agreement, which we did, and we had this great meeting here in Edmonton in 2000, where Chrétien came here and Paul Martin and Ralph Klein, the Edmonton Inn, and we had the big celebration of moving forward with economic development. Mr. Chrétien came to me and said, I hear you lost your hearing on your right ear. And I said, well, Mr. Chrétien, you have the same problem as I have. I know. I was born that way, but you were deaf for about 5 years, and I can tell the difference. I said, why? Well, just the way you turn your head when you listen. One thing what I learned about Chrétien is that he had a great affinity. He was a very charming man, a very personable man, just like Ralph Klein. Ralph Klein, even though he had a lot of issues and the policies he had, one thing that he did have is a connectivity with the people. When you met Ralph Klein or Jean Chrétien, you had his complete attention. And the mark of a politician, I think, is being able to connect to people, inspire people. And that's what leaders should be all about. Yeah, she's an unbelievable lady. Well, I met the Queen for Commonwealth Games in 1978. I was quite impressed with her because I greeted her in French and she spoke perfect French to me. And at that time, we had just published, my brother-in-law and myself had just published the Commonwealth Games book for the city of Edmonton in 1978. I had done that during my summer vacation as a school principal in Beaumont. We presented her with our publication from the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce. And Prince Charles came up to me. He was a young man and also spoke French to me. But I was quite impressed. And in 2005, she came here. First time she actually was in the Alberta legislature. And what I was so impressed with her when I was sitting in the audience is that she reminded Albertans about the history, about the respecting the laws of how the province and the country was created. And she spoke in perfect French and English. And I felt so proud because the whole legislature could see within the Queen the tremendous history lesson that we must remember, that whether we criticize the British monarchy or whatever, when Canada was created as a country, it did respect the fundamental nature of the country. One thing that was left out, though, was the First Nation. It was added on under the Charter of Rights. And we can see the difference, what has happened since '82 now, the revitalization, the laws that now protects the First Nation and their language and culture and territories. And we're finding more and more court case, which gives them a lot more authority. But Queen Victoria, which is another thing through the Piquette affair that a lot of people are not aware of. When the West was given to Canada in 1870, the Manitoba Act was created. Queen Victoria, in her charter, said that Western Canada needed to respect the culture, the language, and the people existing in Western Canada, Northwest Territories. That court case, which was discovered during the Piquette affair, and bring it back into the Supreme Court, was used by the Métis people of Western Canada to win their court case here just 2 years ago. The Queen Victoria Charter. And the Queen, when I look at the document, she had consulted with the people of Western Canada about what kind of country would you like to have with Canada, and it was spelled out. A lot of people don't realize the reason why the Louis Riel rebelled shortly after is because the first government in Manitoba rejected the charter from the Queen Victoria. So today, Queen Elizabeth, 95 years old, I mean, she came to Canada again, which I'm not sure we would. I think we need to celebrate that from the Queen Victoria to Queen Elizabeth, there's been a lot of vision and nation building and allowing Canada to evolve successfully. For example, I remember the signing of the Constitution by Trudeau and the Premier, signing over the last vestige of when Canada was a colony. We didn't even have our own Constitution, right, until 1982. Mm-hmm. But she graciously said, you know, you've grown up as a country. We don't need to have any affair here, but just to celebrate your victories, your evolution as a country. And so I think when I look back as a French Canadian, because a lot of French Canadian resents the Crown, because, you know, of course the Plain of Abraham and the English winning over the Francophones. But to me, that's not the end of the story. The story continues, and the story is beautiful as we evolve as a country. So I would salute the Queen and have a nice little glass of red wine, French red wine, to share with her on her anniversary.